Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 50. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and I cannot believe that we are on episode number 50. That's so crazy to me. So it's almost been a full year's worth of podcasts, and I only took off 2 weeks during that entire time. Otherwise, you got a new episode every single week, and I've shared a lot of content and look forward to sharing a lot more. If you have not given your feedback to me on what you'd like to hear on the podcast, I would love it if you would head over to hustleandflowpodcast.com/survey and let me know a little bit about you, as well as what you would like to hear about on upcoming episodes. And if you haven't left a review yet, I would greatly appreciate it. You can do it on iTunes. If you just give it a rating and you can give it a review, I would greatly appreciate it. I read them. They mean so much to me, and it helps get the podcast in front of other lawyers that might want to listen as well. So if you've not filled out that survey, do that. And if you have not left a rating or review on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would do so. Okay, let's get into the topic for today. Taming the billable hour. Oh, I hate the billable hour. Can we just start with that? I despise the billable hour. And I'm guessing I'm not alone. From the moment I graduated law school, I kept hearing these rumblings about how, corporations don't like the billable hour anymore. This is going to change. And there were discussions about fixed fees and alternative solutions. And, there's a little bit of that going on. And there are some innovative, really small boutique firms that are able to capture the alternative billing in a way that larger firms either can't or won't. But, there's really not been that much change. And that was like 15 years ago. So the topic for today, part of what I'm going to do is help you understand how to approach billable hours from a planning perspective, both in terms of making sure you hit your hours and in terms of making sure that you don't kill yourself and go way over your hours. We'll talk about the pros and cons of both of those. But before we get started, just because I can't have a discussion about billable hours without first having the disclaimer that I think it is a terrible idea and that, that most of our problems in the legal industry relate to the billable hour, and it's all our fault. And we refuse to fix it or change it, and I don't know why. Well, I kind of do. Part of it is because we don't like change. We claim to be problem solvers, but we're not really that great at problem solving our own business issues. And companies they're a little bit full of it too. They say they don't like the billable hour, but they're so used to it as well. They don't seem to know how to budget otherwise for it. So that is not to say that some companies don't fully embrace fixed fees and firms don't embrace fixed fees, but we tend to only do it in certain areas. We say it's only possible in certain areas, which drives me a little bit crazy because you can look at all of the other businesses that are also service models, okay? We are not special because we provide a service. There are plenty of businesses out there that are on a service model that do not charge by 6-minute increments. Okay? And they do very well. They're very wealthy. They do great. And so that's just not true. I don't buy it. I don't agree with it. As you can tell, I feel strongly about this. I also think that the billable hour discourages innovation and efficiency. If you are someone that can go in and knock something out like in a half hour or an hour, and the guy sitting next to you, bills 3 or 4 or 5 hours because he's thinking through every issue, which is completely unnecessary for what's even going on, the only person that gets rewarded is the guy because he billed more hours and brought in more money when it's not really doing a service to the client. And clients get so used to working with the same attorneys and the same firms all the time that they don't even really challenge what's going on. So the whole thing is just frustrating to me because there are so many ways that you can approach it. And by the way, let me also say, I promise I'm about to get off my soapbox. For people that say, oh, well, you can't do anything but a billable hour for litigation because there's so many, like you don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, I mean, that's true in a lot of situations. And again, I think we just build ourselves up to think we're special in ways that we're not. Companies all the time, even companies that aren't in services, right? They bid for projects and they have no idea what's going to go right and what's going to go wrong, but they bid it anyway. You know, my husband, he's a tool and die maker, so they're kind of in manufacturing. But I can also think of others that do like design work and like web work. And you can do it by the hour if you want, but a lot of people want predictability. And my guess is you as a lawyer want predictability when you're hiring people as well. You want to know the budget. If a contractor came into you and said, oh, I'll build a house for you and it's going to be this much an hour. And you're like, well, how many hours is it going to take? And the contractor says, well, so many different things could change. I mean, I don't know if this is going to happen. I don't know if that's going to happen. There's no way to predict it. And so like, I mean, I can give you a rough budget and like the budget's going to be like $400,000, range. Like you wouldn't go with that contractor. You'd be like, I can't do that. I have to have some kind of idea of what's going to happen. But for whatever reason, we think that we're different and that we absolutely can't make estimates. But businesses do it all the time. And sometimes they do it wrong and they lose money. And sometimes they do it wrong and make a lot of money. But you get really good at it when you actually track things and pay attention. It allows you to be predictable. And when you're just tracking the billable hour in order to figure out how much money you would have made on your flat fee, that's not how businesses do it, by the way. Like you're not actually tracking the right thing. So anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox though, because here's the thing. If you work in a firm that bills by the hour and has billable hour expectations, and if you're at a firm that's probably most of you, then it is what it is. You've got to deal with it. And so this episode is for those of you dealing with it, how to get on top of it. Okay. So as you know, I'm a master planner and I always did this, throughout my career, and others that always struggled with their hours would be like, how do you do that? And I'm like, it's called discipline, but let me show you how you actually do the formula. But you can do this. Okay. You absolutely can do this. This allows you to do two things. One is it allows you to hit your hours. If you are worried that you can't hit your hours, this is going to let you know whether you can or you can't. And it's going to put you in as much control as you can be. There is never a guarantee, but this is really going to help. Now, if you are a partner and you fall within one of those partnership traps that I talked about in episode number 45 in December, you may not have as much control, but you at least want to be aware of what's going on so that you can try to be in front of it. That's one thing. The second thing, some of you don't ever really have an issue of hitting your hours. Your issue is you bill so many hours that you're not even being compensated for them. Like, I don't even care what the bonus and comp structure is. I guarantee that at a certain point, there's a diminishing return. And the only reason you're billing that many hours is you don't know how to actually stop. So I'm going to give you this formula. It does require that you take action. It does require that you go ask for help. It does require you to say no. It's going to require a lot more than the formula, right? You got to get out of your comfort zone a little bit and do the work and, follow through. But the formula is the first step. Otherwise, you're just kind of doing it blindly and hoping it all works out for the best. And that's never a good approach. Okay. So here's how you do the math on this. And I get that we're already into January. I'll show you how you can adjust for it. I'm going to go through it as if it was like January 1. And for some of you, your firms actually restart on a different date. And by the way, is that not like the worst feeling in the world? You've worked so hard and you've been building up your hours and you watch it grow. And then the next day it's zero. That does not feel like a fresh, clean start. It's like, oh God, I'm back at zero. But anyway, here's how you do this calculation. The first thing that you want to do is figure out what's your target? Part of this is your decision. Part of this is your firm's decision. Some of your firms have billable requirements and they expect you to hit a minimum. Some firms have set ranges of hours that make you eligible for certain bonuses. Okay. So if you are an associate, you always want to hit your minimum hours. And if you're an associate that wants to make partner, you need to do more than hit your minimum hours. Unless you know for certain that at your firm, people hit their minimum hours all the time and still make partner. At most firms, that minimum requirement is not actually enough to get you into partnership, okay? Because often it looks like, you're doing just enough. It looks like you're not really a team player. You don't have that owner mentality. So don't just try to hit that number. If, again, you are aspiring to be partner. If you're not, if you are just in it for a certain amount of time, or, you're interested in more of an of-counsel position or a staff position, hit that number all day long and leave at the end of the day. That's fine. But otherwise, you want something that's higher than that. Now, the next thing you want to do is look at those bonus ranges. Some firms will tell you exactly what kind of money you can make if you hit that. Others just say you go into a higher bracket, but it's all a little fuzzy and they don't really give you particulars. And in many firms, that even changes from year to year. So even if you go try to find out what's really going on and how people get compensated with bonuses, depending on, what range they're in, you may not get the same results the next year, because a lot of times bonuses depend on how well the firm did. So if you hit that high bracket one year and you hit it the next year, you may not get the same bonus. Okay. So I know that can be a really frustrating thing for associates. I always think it's a good idea when firms actually have set ranges and set numbers so people know what they're working towards. When it's a little fuzzier, it can get really, really frustrating when you expect it to be one thing and it's not. And then you start to wonder what kind of message is being sent to you. And the truth is there may not be a message at all. Or you can get really upset when you know that you killed it that year and you make less. So anyway, if you know exactly what you're making, it's going to be easier for you to say, okay, here's what I'm aiming for. For those of you that don't know, it's just a higher bracket. It's going to take a little bit more contemplation for you. But even those that have those brackets, because we tend to be high achievers, and because we all seem to want more money, and because we want to be the best of the best, we tend to go for the highest one, right? So we say, well, I definitely want to get in the top range. But really think it through. Really, even if the numbers change each year, I want you to try to get a feel for what that looks like. And then I want you to do the math on how many more hours you're working for how much more money. And I want you to consider basically what you're sacrificing. So, because you tend to just do it by the hour. And it's like, is that worth it by the hour? Don't do it like that, okay? Because you're just focused on money, and money isn't everything. So what you want to do is think about it in terms of, okay, what would I do with those 100 other hours? If I'm not putting it towards work, what else would I be spending it on? And if the answer is non-billable work, then please, for the love of God, do the billable hours, get the money because you're still working, right? I think I've gone through this before. I did an episode on non-billable purgatory, and I cannot think of the episode number, but we'll put it in the show notes. So many people, especially women, get in this trap of doing non-billable work that is allegedly taken into consideration, but not actually paid for. If you are just going to be swapping your time for billable work for non-billable work that's not guaranteed pay at the same rate, don't do it. Go ahead and commit to the billable. If you would spend that other time maybe going on vacation, reading a book, hanging out with your family, then I want you to really consider, is that money worth what you lost in time, in energy, in relationships? And only you can make that decision. I'm not suggesting that you would never go for the money. That's perfectly fine. But I want you to think through it in terms of what's the trade-off, because there's always a trade-off. And if you're just doing it because you think, I should be excelling, I should be achieving, I should be at that highest point, you might burn out and you might not live the life that you could, one that's more enjoyable. So you want to really get clear on exactly what your target is at the get-go, okay? So some people will say, oh, well, my target's just the minimum, and then if I make more, great. But I encourage you to go ahead right now and say, what do I want to hit? Like, what's my mark? Even including those higher bonus numbers. Same thing for partners. The discussion's just a little bit different in terms of sometimes when you make partner in your first 1 to 3 years, if there's a tendency at your firm to cut you off from work, firms still have those minimum billable hours, but they tend to be a little bit more forgiving. Not all firms, though. You've got to know your firm. If it's a little bit more forgiving and it's really more important that you start building your book of business fast, because it's not really going to impact your compensation much. Like if you're not going to actually be hurt in any way by not hitting the number, then you want to probably actually aim for less than the minimum so that you can start building your book of business if that's what matters most. Because they'll tell you that you need to hit the minimum, but they also expect you to build your own book of business. So again, you've got to figure out your firm. And sometimes firms have exceptions, but you got to figure out, are you one of the exceptions? Sometimes you assume that because someone else did it, you can too, but that's maybe not how management sees it. So just getting clear on what is going to be expected of you. Even if you don't get a straight answer, if you have enough discussions, you can get a good feel for it. So your number might actually be less than the minimum. On the opposite side of that, if you are a huge rainmaker and the firm has minimums, even for rainmakers, if you're bringing in enough money, you don't have to hit that minimum. You just don't. They're not going to push you out, right? We all know stories over and over again of rainmakers that do terrible things but are allowed to stay at firms because of their money, right? Which means if they can get away with those terrible things, then they can also get away with not hitting the minimum. Okay, so with that said, you've got your number. Once you have your target number, you want to take your calendar for the entire year and you want to consider how many vacations you're taking, how many holidays you're taking. Now, there's no way to get this exact, but you can think it through. So don't just like throw a number out there. Look at your year before. What holidays did you actually take off? So you're not really looking at when is the firm closed, but when did you take off? How often were you sick? If you're not sick that much, it's probably not a big deal, but you might want to build in a day or two just to be safe. If you have health issues and you're out a lot, you need to consider that. If you have vacations planned that you know are coming up, then you need to go ahead and consider how long you'll be out. If you tend to just take long weekends in the summer, or you tend to leave early on Friday in the summer, you want to consider that. So part of what you're trying to look at is not just days that you're going to be taking off completely, but you want to be looking at days where you think that your hours will be shorter than average. So for example, if during the summer you tend to leave early on Friday, then you're going to want to put in there, maybe it's a 3/4 day, right? I personally like to go online and find printable monthly calendars. And so you just print January through December. You don't need anything fancy on this. You just need it blank. You need the dates in there, but you print it out. You've got all 12 in front of you. You basically, to the extent you take weekends off, you can mark those out. To the extent you work half days on some weekends, right? You can put that in. But you're basically, you can do it one of two ways. You can consider a full day like 1, right? So then you'd be doing like half, 3/4 1. Or you can do the actual hours that you tend to bill, because you're going to know in your mind what that looks like. So even if you're in the office 12 hours, if you're only billing 8, I would probably put 8, but you could put 12 if you wanted. As we get through the end of this process, you might have a better idea of how to do it. But basically, you're just trying to figure out how many hours are available each day. Now, if you're taking a vacation and you don't know when that's going to be, that's fine. Just pick a week, right? It doesn't matter. This is just a calculation. You can pick a week or two different times to just go ahead and mark through. So they've got zeros, just so you know. Okay, so once you get through vacations, once you get through, long weekends, once you get through shorter hours, And like at the holidays, right? Like if you tend to not work as much during the holidays or towards the end of the year, even if you go in the office, be honest about that. So once you have filled that in for the entire year, you've got all 12 printable sheets out, then you want to calculate how much time you have available to work. So if we're just sticking with days, right, like the 1 full day or 3/4 or half day, let's say you come up with, okay, I have 300 days available for the year. And you might actually be working more than 300, but when you do the math on the half days and the 3/4 days, you end up to 300. And by the way, I'm completely making that up. I'm not even suggesting that's a good number. I'm just saying for purposes of this example, 300 days is what you have. Okay, so now you've got your target, right? You already picked your target out. This is simple math. You just divide it. And then that tells you how many hours you have to work each day. Now, as you know, every day's not the same. Not every month is the same, which is why you want that 12-month calendar. So now that you've got how many hours that you need to bill every single day to hit your target, you're going to pull out January, and you're just looking at January alone. At that point, you're going to be able to see what you have estimated for purposes of how often you're going to be out, right? So you've got your vacation days or your half days, you know what it is. That's going to help you true up that number. So again, just to make the math easy, let's say that you have 7 hours that you need to bill for 300 days to get 2,100 hours. Again, I'm not saying that's a good or a bad target. I'm just doing easy math. So you know that you need to bill 7 hours a day. At that point, you are looking at January and you're looking at how many full days do you have, how many half days do you have, how many, 3/4 days you have, and you just do the math. You add all that up, you multiply it by 7, and then that gives you your target for the month. Okay? And so that's what you're working towards. I personally always found it helpful to have that be more important than the actual day. I tried to also match the day, but things come and go. If you're in a deposition or if you're in trial, if you've got a big closing going on, you're going to just spend more time there. So for me, it was just easier to keep track from a monthly perspective while keeping an eye on what was happening daily. So here's what I mean by that. So let's say you've looked at January and you say, okay, I've got 23 days in January that I can work. If I multiply that by the 7 hours I need to be billing, that means that my target for January is 161 hours. Then that's what I'm focused on, right? By the way, you don't go ahead and do February through December. I want you to keep these printouts, staple them together, put them in a file folder on your desk. Keep them handy. You're going to do this every month. But for January, this is the one you need to do now. You go ahead and do it. So you know what you've got going on. Now, for those of you that are catching up, it's not that clean slate. So you can basically deduct out what you've already billed. And it could be that you need to make your target even higher or lower just to kind of true it up. Or you can just try to catch up. So let's say you've now got 161 hours. That's your target for the month. Every day where you have a day that you are working, it's worth saying my goal is 7 hours, but you don't have to completely freak out if you don't hit the 7 hours. That said, if you know, you're just paying attention to that. If you go 4 days and you've only billed 4 hours for 4 days, you've got a problem. And you should know that that's a problem because you were aiming for 7. If there was work to be done, I did not leave the office until I hit whatever my target was for the day, unless I was just super tired or exhausted or knew that something else was big coming up that was going to make up for it. But otherwise, you really need to pay attention to that. Don't wait until the very last week to be like, oh, I'm not going to hit my target. But again, you don't have to be so regimented that you're doing it exactly every single day to hit the exact number, because if you do that, it doesn't take into account the fact that most people are going to have some days that are longer and some days when it's shorter. Take advantage of that. Otherwise, you get into the habit of overshooting your number, which is a bad thing because you're not getting compensated appropriately for it and you're likely to burn out, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Now, you might be wondering, well, why can't I just take all 12 months, divide that by my goal, and just aim for that? Well, The reason that's not a great idea is because it doesn't actually work with your schedule. It doesn't take into consideration that maybe some months it's not going to make sense for you to bill that many hours. Whereas with other months, you need to be billing more. If there are more days in the month, then you need to bill more. And unless you have the kind of practice where you just automatically can hit your hours, if you do that kind of calculation, it doesn't actually help you because it's not reflecting what's actually happening in your business. So if you can go ahead and get each month exact, it helps. So then, all right, let's say you did January. Now you're getting ready to prepare for February. So our target was 161. Let's say I only hit 151. Actually, let's say 150. That makes the math easier. So what I would do, I would take the 2,100 hours. That's my target to bill. And I'm going to deduct from that the 150 that I billed. So now I have 1,950 that I still need to bill for the rest of the year. And I had 300 days, but I've already used up 23 of them. So now I have 277 days left. So then I'm going to do that math. And now I'm doing this on my calculator right now. It says 7.03971119. So it's a little bit more. So depending on however many days you have in February, you would multiply that and you would have it. And so as you can see, this allows you to adjust each and every month, not just for what happened in previous months, but based on what's actually happening in that month. Now, you may recall I told you with vacations and other things, you're just estimating. When you get to that month, you're going to have a much better idea of what's actually happening, right? So if you're going on vacation, you should know that. Or if you're not going to take a holiday or you are going to take a holiday, you'll know that. So you can update how many days you're actually going to have available that month when the month actually gets there. I always still tried to stick with the total days though. So if you're going to be changing the days in a way that impacts that total days number, then again, your math's going to be a little bit different. But it's important to update it each and every month. And this is how you know you are on track, no matter what's going on. So you're not just saying, well, I know that some months are busier than others or it'll all work out. This basically gives you a roadmap to ensure that you are getting what you need. And if you notice that your hours are getting low, then by all means, you need to go tell your practice group leader, or you need to go talk to the partners that you normally work with, or maybe you go have a conversation with a client to see if they have more work they can give you. But you need to be proactive. It's one thing to be aware that your hours are low. It's another to do something about it. And so many people will say, yeah, but I'm worried if I go ask for this work, it'll be too much. That's super dangerous. I highly encourage you to be in front of it. So if your hours are getting low and it's early in the year, I would not just sit on your laurels and expect that it's all going to work out. I would go proactively try to get that work. And it looks really good when you do that. So when you're trying to get the work all year long, and let's say you don't hit your hours, you're probably going to be seen differently than someone who just wasn't doing the work. And, you know, people probably assume they're either lazy or, you know, they were just goofing off or just don't care. So you want to get in front of that. On the other hand, let's say that you had a big project or two come up. You've billed a ton of hours and, you know, you're getting tired. When someone comes to you with another project, now, if it's in the beginning of the year, it's a little bit more difficult. You need to be able to look at your projections and say no. If you cannot take that work on, if it's going to require you to completely burn out, then you have to be responsible for letting others know what you can and can't handle. And you're always probably going to have pushback. There are always partners, there are always firms that expect you, they don't care, right? And they're just going to expect you to do the work. But that's where you really have to stand up for yourself. And so if you genuinely care about your long-term happiness and success, if you genuinely care about not completely burning out and just leaving one day, then it's really important that you have those conversations and that even if difficult, you say, you know, I've already been working too much. And if I don't get more realistic with this, you know, I'm really concerned that I'm going to burn out. And if they don't hear that message and they don't care, my personal opinion is that that is not a good long-term fit for you. And I get there's a lot of firms out there that are like that, but that doesn't have to be your reality. And, if they're not going to take care of you, you've got to take care of you. Life is way too short to just buy into someone else's agenda. But this is how you stay on top of it. This is how you make sure you're going to hit your hours. If you see that you're being low, you be proactive about it. If you see you're working way too much, then it's important for you to have those same conversations and say, I can't take that on. And again, you'll even have the data to back that up. I get that that's oversimplifying that because there are politics and personalities involved, but know that it is a discussion that can be had and you should be responsible for your well-being as well as your hours. So I hope that's helpful. For those of you that kind of feel like, you're really up and then down, this is super helpful. You may be a solo and you're thinking, I don't even really have to worry about that. It's just my own billable hours. This process still helps if you have certain targets. If a billable hour relates to a certain amount of income for you, then it's still really important. So even if you're getting low, you know that you need to go ratchet up some business development efforts. And if you're crazy, you don't stop doing it. You just, want to maintain. So I hope this has been helpful. You're at the beginning of a new year. You have plenty of time to now create your formula, update it every single month, and then make sure that you hit the target of your choosing. So, I'm just adding this in at the end. I think we'll do a free worksheet for you guys on this. I don't know about you, but math is not really my strong suit. I can do it, but sometimes it's confusing just hearing it. So we'll do an example worksheet that just walks through the math so that you can see how it actually works to the extent any of this was confusing or you don't want to listen back to it again to actually create your own formula. So you'll be able to grab that at hustleandflowpodcast.com/50. hustleandflowpodcast.com/50. Thanks and have a great week. For show notes, downloads, and other free resources, and to keep the conversation going, head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com. See you there.